So you're going to make something out of cardboard, but you don't want it to look like kindergarten. Let's see what we got here. So in class we're using the bandsaw and we're making sure that our material is prepped, and cardboard is a bit simpler than this. So your challenge is more about being able to handle the material of cardboard in order to make something that looks a bit nicer. Now, honestly, you can make pretty neat things. This is a pen holder that's been made out of into the shape of a turtle, and it uses some structural elements, some forms that allow it to stay rigid the way it does, that you can use in your designs. So I want to introduce you to this little nook right here. So you'll see that I have notches on opposite ends. This one is at the bottom, this one's at the top. And the purpose of these are to provide an interlocking stand. Now, it doesn't always have to be a stand. You could have a character maybe with a shelf, if it was like a waiter or something, with their hand like this. You could use a notch in one material and the other material to slide them together and make a surface that could hold a candle or whatever it might be. So, let me talk about this because there's a few important factors. So, when we're trying to design something with a notch like this, I've indicated three things here. We have A, B, and C. So A, the width of this notch should be equal to the thickness of the material. For my example, I have 2 sheets of cardboard. So to figure out the width of this notch, I had to get my ruler and measure, I had to measure how thick the material is. Here, it's just about, 3/16 of an inch. So you want to make sure you have the thickness of your material to match the thickness of that groove, because eventually your material needs to slide through the groove. If it can't, it won't work. And vice versa, you would want to measure how thick this material is and compare it to your grooves for this. I'll leave it. Okay, so A, the thickness or the width of this groove. B is half of the desired depth. The reason why you want it to be half the depth is because you're distributing half of the distance here and half of the distance here. When you go to interlock them, it's going to magically add those two depths together so it can sit flat. Yeah, sit flat. I'm a little off. That's okay. Quick demonstration. The reason why you don't want to do most of your depth here and barely anything here is that it's going to provide more surface area for friction to hold this together, and it'll lower the likelihood that you rip this material if you have a smaller notch. Okay, C. C is the entire piece of material. C should be greater than or equal to 2B. What am I saying here? You really only want to go about halfway through the material. Too much more and you could run into issues with the material failing. So once again, you want the width of these grooves to be the same as the thickness of the material. You want the depth to be half the desired, 3D. You want the depth of the cut to be half of the desired total depth that it interlocks with. And C, you want to have half the material still connected so that it doesn't fall apart. Another element that you may notice is that I provided some depth. I could put a face in here too. I tried to give you a quick example of how you can make something look a little nicer. Now, if I was doing this for real, I would glue the entire surface of this to the entire surface of the other one once I have it cut the way I want. This gives a little bit of depth and it outlines the object. It makes it look a little more interesting than if it were just a single cactus. Okay, so we talked about two things. We talked about using those notches to either add shelving or to make a base that it can stand up. And we talked about using thicker materials. So I want to just highlight this. I think when the problem that makes cardboard things look a little, primitive, is because when we use cardboard, we don't think to just layer stack on stack on stack on stack. But when you add thickness to something, I think it gives a more refined appearance. So you want to have multiple layers of cardboard for each of your character layers. I had another thing. Multiple layers. You want to glue your pieces together. You want to have these slots. And also, much like wood, you can consider cardboard to have grain. Hear me out. So corrugated cardboard is called corrugated because it has this, corrugation, for lack of a better word, in between two solid sheets. This is basically like the equivalent of plywood, but in the paper world. You have two sheets of paper glued to a different sheet that's spiraled in and out. And there's some unique properties with this. You'll get a piece of scrap cardboard and do this with me. If you are going along the lines of the corrugation, here, so you can see it better. There's lines here. It's very easy to bend. It's very easy. I barely have to try. And you get a fairly straight bend. If you try bending it perpendicular, almost like if we were like a cross cut with the corrugation, you'll find that it's a lot harder to break those spines. So when you glue your pieces together to get the strongest result, it's going to be very similar to plywood. You want to have one layer going this way and another layer perpendicular. What does that do? It gives strength in multiple directions, so it won't be as likely to bend. What you need to do now is look at your sketches for our project, and you need to make adjustments to incorporate some of these elements. Using notches to either make it more stable or provide some depth like a ledge. I want you to consider using, this is optional, if you wanted to make smaller pieces, you could do that. And then I want you to use multiple layers of cardboard and try to be conscious to change which direction the corrugation goes. One thing I did forget, how did I make a pretty good representation but proportionately smaller? Well, here's your answer. I cut two of the same shape out, and then I took a scissor and I just cut an 1/8 inch about off the edges of the character. I'm just calling this a character. So that way I was able to keep a perfectly uniform model that's slightly smaller. If I just remove the entire outside, then it's going to be smaller. What you could do, this is my last bit, is you can take the smaller version. If you wanted to do multiple layers, you could then take the smaller version, throw it on a piece of paper, just like this, and you can trace it very carefully. And I may not do a good job, but that's okay, because at least you'll get the concept. So you trace it, right? And you get your trace. Once you cut that out, then you can take your scissors and you can remove yet another boundary. And that would provide even more depth when you go to create your object. Okay? So do your task that's in Google Classroom.